Jamie was interested in getting me to say something because we were really lucky to get over to Tiree in October, which was a big surprise. We got a lot done of what we expected to get done, Dougie and Robert and Libby and various other. We got over, we were incredibly lucky in small socially distanced groups, but we also were even luckier to be joined by Dr. Diana Zilioli. Now, Diana is, she's a very good friend of mine, but she's also a very good Scottish tour guide in Italian. But in a past life, she was a soil scientist. So we rather serendipitously kind of left our usual ACFA methods of finding and recording and dipped our toes into soil analysis. And so I'm going to just give you a little summary of what she did when she was on Tiree, which I have to say, for me anyway, I mean, like a lot of you, I've been in archaeological excavations, and when we studied archaeology, we've looked a little bit at soil scientists, but I've never been up close and personal to somebody who is actually involved in soil science. And I was astounded by what she brought to the project in a matter of a couple of days. It was really stunning. And incredibly, given the year we've all had, it felt as if the project really took a big leap forward. So this is my attempt in a very amateur way to describe what I saw her doing, but obviously it would be really nice if we do have these winter lectures, perhaps if everyone wishes to get Diana to come and speak for herself and give you a sort of professional's view of what she was doing, and also Fred, who's assisting Diana on the ecology of Hynish on Tiree. So here we are. Most of you will be, many of you will be very familiar with this, and we'll have into Tiree yourselves. So we're working at the moment on Hynish here, Ballyfuel, Lochafuel, and then the radar station, the golf ball. So this is us here. Now, one of the interesting things that we've always found about Hynish is that on the face of it, it looks like a very difficult peripheral terrain. It's not the kind of place you would be by choice. And yet, on the actual area of Hynish, it's very busy. 620 features, 1,100 lines of boundary walls. So there's been a huge amount of activity in what looks like a very peripheral part of the island. And so this is one of the areas that we've been very interested in, and you can see here these very clear enclosures. There's a lot of activity here, a big house structure, and various other houses coming down here, and lots of walls up here. This is a post-improvement dike coming down, and the later bank sitting also on top of other features. So we've always been very curious about the chronology of this activity. The only feature that appears in the first edition OS map is this enclosure here. Nothing else in the state maps. It doesn't appear in any other maps. So the question is, was this activity at a time of high population pressure? Does the activity not appear in maps because they weren't deemed worthy of noting, or is it earlier? So this has always been our conundrum. And so in many ways, when we launched the Hynish Boundary Line project with Ed and Ailsa and Fred helping to map all these boundary walls, really what we were looking to do was to see if we could start picking out different types of boundary walls and associated structures to perhaps begin to suggest a chronology for the activity on the hill. So Diana agreed to come along and have a look. She was not very confident because the soil depth in Tiree is very shallow. So she wasn't very confident that she'd be able to help. And in fact, she admitted recently she was really worried that she wouldn't be able to help at all, which wouldn't really have bothered us because she was being very kind to come in the first place. But Deanna is a born soil scientist. She adores it. It's her first love. And so she was absolutely desperate to get her teeth into soil analysis again. And she has a lot of experience in the past of working with in the Alps and alpine areas and in South America. So she's well used to working in areas of peripheral settlement. But as I say, she didn't hold out much hope of being able to help us. So the first area that we went to was down by the coast, where we decided that she was going to take a sort of soil sample pit of the general soil on Tiree that hasn't been affected by settlement. And serendipitously, these two very strange characters, not quite sure what Dougie thinks he's doing to John Holiday, but they were given permission to excavate a possible lithic scatter. So this is them laying the area out here, nicely social distance. They've got their hand washing stuff here, so it's all very well and good. And actually, if you sit in this little area here, it's a little armchair away from the wind, so it's not difficult to imagine somebody sitting here sheltering. And Dougie found quite a lot of lithic fragments in this area, and I would like to think that somebody was sitting here who was right-handed was napping away, but anyway, that's just supposition. So Deanna and I were up here, where she was simultaneously taking the first of the soil samples. So this is Deanna Zilioli. She's a great character. This is about the cleanest she ever gets when she's on a soil survey. And this is basically what she was doing. So she was taking a small sample of the soil on the island to see what it was like in an area that hadn't been used for agriculture or anything. So it was a sample of what the soils were like in the island. And here you can see the kind of report that she came up with. So these are horizons. So there are 3 horizons in the soil here. And you can see the first horizon is up to 5 centimeters, the second 5 to 11 centimeters, and the third 11 to 19 centimeters. And just remember the 11 centimeter bit. But anyway, so this is the kind of thing she can do very quickly. Obviously, a lot of her proper job is very complex soils with lab work and all sorts of really expensive lab technologies. But this is the basics of what somebody like Deanna can do. And what you can see here as well, it's quite interesting, the different horizons, how much sand is in them. So up to 15% in the first horizon, this bit here, 20% clay, and 70 to 65% silt. And then you can see down here variations of this. But what was fantastic was, while Deanna was doing this and discussing the 11 centimeter soil horizon, Dougie was underneath, and exactly 11 centimeters he was finding worked lithic fragments. So within 30 minutes of Deanna being on site, he was able to confirm that there's a very strong possibility that it was in situ, that it hasn't been, there's a track nearby, so it's not been disturbed or pushed over or whatever, that actually, you know, Dougie was probably at 11 centimeters, revealing something in its original position. So that was a real bonus that we weren't expecting. We left John and Dougie, and we went up onto the hill where we really wanted Deanna to have a look at. So the first area we went to was this enclosure here, if you all can see it here, and it's got a structure in it. This one's similar, you can see here. We were interested in this one because It doesn't look like it from this height, but this is a very large and substantial enclosure wall of stone and turf. So it's quite substantial, quite high. And near it, and almost looking as if it's coming underneath, are some lower walls, a lower wall here, and also possibly here as well. So we had already started to wonder if we are seeing something earlier underneath this bigger enclosure. And Deanna, she kind of put the cat among the pigeons a little bit at the start, because we were making the general assumption, and it has indeed been proven, that the higher the walls, the younger they are, the lower the walls, the older they are. However, she challenged that a little bit in the sense that she said a lot of the height of this big, large enclosure wall might also have been created partly by a long period of time of vegetation growth. So it actually might mean that the wall is quite old. So the first area that Diana looked at was the wall in here, where she took another little mini pit, and she found that this wall is sitting on top of an old soil surface. So the wall isn't dug in, it's literally just an old soil surface, and even an amateur eye could see it. It was really obvious. And then if you look at these walls here, these walls were actually dug into an even older soil surface. So again, within half a day, that she had confirmed that these walls are younger and the smaller single stone walls are older. And this is the big enclosure wall. And she's certainly the area that she looked at here. She's pretty sure that the wall wasn't built of stone and turf. There may be a bit of turf in it, but actually it was a stone wall laid out on top of a soil surface, an older soil surface. And a lot of this that's on top is a long period of growth of vegetation. And she also took a small core from inside the enclosure, and you can see that the soil here is good. This is not poor soil, it's good soil. So we were much emboldened by this. I was actually really quite astounded that we got as much as we had in half a day. So we then moved up the hill towards the bank, and you can see here, this is the big enclosure that we were looking at with the structure. So we then came up to this enclosure here. Now this is a very big, old, substantial house. Many of you who've worked on Hynish and Tiree will recognise it. You can't miss it. And it's very big, very substantial, maybe sitting in something earlier. There's been something's going on here. And so we had a look at this little bit of wall in here, which is sort of a low wall. And I mean, you could argue possibly that it's related to the structure. You could argue possibly it might be related to something earlier, maybe not, but it is in the vicinity of this very large house structure, which is really the biggest of the house structures that we have on Hynish. So Deanna had a look at the wall here, and this wall is also older than this big enclosure. This wall is older than the large enclosures that we have here. So this area of the hill has been occupied for a very, very long time, and a lot earlier than this terrace that we were initially really quite interested in. And actually, in a way, we should have known this. I mean, we kind of got caught up in a lot of stuff when really, at the end of the day, you know, where are people living? They're living in houses. Where are the most houses? Here, and there's more here and here. So it kind of makes sense. So it's looking like the oldest part of the occupation and farming activity in the hill is on the highest part of the hill here. And so Diana also had to dug a tiny pit here, and that is also older. So it's similarly as old as this wall here. And it starts opening up some really interesting possibilities, because there's a lot of activity in this area, possible house structures. You can see walls coming down, which now we might start to suggest and think about being quite old. Another house here. And then if you look further down here, some more activity, and along here, Dougie will correct me, but I think this is the curbed cairn. So we're starting all of a sudden to get not just a hypothesis of a chronology, but now it's a very wide chronology, obviously older and younger, but even so, we can quite strongly start to suggest a chronology for some of the features. And she also took some coring from the middle of this enclosure. And we've got this here. This is the small wall I was talking about near the structure. And can you see here, you can see really clearly that it's not sitting on top of an old soil surface or like the other one, but actually dug into it and sitting on top of an older one. So, and I mean, the soil is superb. It's really good. She tested it pretty much over Hynish, but particularly in this part of the hill, it's got a very neutral pH. It's light. It's to touch. I mean, it's the kind of topsoil you would use in your garden. It's unexpectedly good for somewhere that you assume would be a very peripheral part. So people have been, this is it's an old soil archaeologically, not obviously from Diana's point of view.
But this is a soil that has been evolving since the last ice age and that mankind has been modifying for a long time.
And also in terms of chronology, can you see this really clear sand? And this is appearing in all the mini pits on Hynish that Diana dug. So we know that there were some very severe sand events in the rest of Tiree, townships that stopped being occupied because of huge amounts of sand blow. And there must have been a heck of a lot of sand in the wind for it to get up to Hynish. I mean, you know, it's really distinct. So one can start to wonder, is this event something that stopped the occupation in this part of the hill, and then maybe they moved to the terrace with the slightly younger enclosures and modified those? Was this an element in what happened? And it certainly is giving us an idea of dating, because we have some quite good historical dates for when there were severe episodes of sand blow. And also the soil itself, it does have an element of sand all the way through it, which may also partly contribute to the particular balance it has that is making this soil really good for people to farm on. So I was just astounded actually by what we got from this. Now this is Diana and her lovely daughter Mia, a budding soil scientist. You can see she's concentrating very much because they were finding a lot of worms. So this is a very healthy soil. So we did get slightly diverted by rescuing a worm family and relocating them elsewhere. But look at the quality of the soil.
Yeah.
This has been a big surprise. This surprised Diana as well. When she was reading up about Tiree and they talked about the pH being almost neutral, she was really surprised. She would have expected an acidic soil, but we were both astounded by how good this soil is on this part of the hill. Now, this is about as messy as it gets, but it's an actually very non-intrusive method in many ways. When you replace the turf, fill it in and replace the turf, the following day we'd have struggled to have seen where we'd be. So it's a very, very quick, very non-intrusive method really in the field. So yes, we also, Diana, we walked up to this walling here. The whole hill's littered with single stone walling. It's a very complex system. You don't really get a sense of how much there is there. And so we had a look at that as well. And this is also like this enclosure. older than this enclosure. So this is older as well. And so whether we're starting to pick up, I mean, you know, obviously they could be territorial, they could be almost consumption dikes for the grazing to get rid of all the stone from where they're grazing. But we're now starting to tentatively say, well, look, we're talking about a huge range in time, you know, obviously, but these and these are all older and these are slightly younger, but still maybe older than we thought because of the size of the walls that are there. So yeah, it was a bit of a revelation, I must say. I feel as if the whole project has taken a huge jump forward. So yeah.
Okay, can everybody hear me and see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay then. So I'm going to give you an update on the field boundary survey, which Fred, Ed and myself have been involved in. We've had 3 visits recording to Tiree, one in June. There were 3 teams in 2019 and there were 2 teams in October 2019. But this year there was just Ed and me for a week. And we weren't spending all the time actually surveying the lines, because Ed was also taking drone photographs, which we want to involve in this as well. The advantage of taking the drone photographs was you get more detail than on the OS aerial photographs, and also better than, say, Bing and Google and all the other satellites and aerial photographs. Now, on the boundary survey, the first thing that we did, or what Ed did actually, was to trace the lines in the aerial photographs in QGIS, which is a geographical information system. Now, you've just seen with Elaine what the aerial photographs look like, and you could see all the lines on them. So what Ed did was to trace along these lines, and he created a map of all the lines that he could see on Ben Hynish. Now, the next step that we did when we actually went to Tiree was to walk these lines. We had downloaded the lines to View Ranger, which is an app on a smartphone, and that allowed us to walk along the lines and record information on them. We recorded the information using an app called Tapforms, and we either used an iPad or an iPhone to do this. So once we had finished the surveys, people would email the data to me, a bit like CSV files or Excel spreadsheets, if you like. And then what we did was load all that data to QGIS. Now, one of the things that we've been doing since we came back in October this year is to actually identify the lines on the first edition OS map, so we could recognise which ones we were actually seeing out in the landscape, which were on the first edition map. We also had a look at the Turnbull map, and Ed went and georeferenced that. Had some problems doing that, which you'll see in one of the later slides. I'm trying to identify which lines on the Turnbull map you can still see today. Now, Elaine has already talked about the difference between older and younger lines. Is that to do with the height they are now? Is it to do with what they're made of? Is it a mixture of the two? And can we actually see evidence in the landscape when we're walking over the land? Can we see one type of line underlying another type of line? And when people were filling in the forms, they were noticing this. So one of the things we want to actually do now on is to actually add in the sites of the houses. So Elaine has already pointed that out on the map, the interrelationship between enclosures and house sites. Sometimes a house site is in the middle of an enclosure, sometimes it's actually on the line itself. We think these are earlier, but we haven't really proved that yet, but that's the sort of thing we want to do. So what we're wanting to do before we get to go back to Tiree again next year is to do more work on what interrelationships there is between the enclosures, the lines, the house sites, and probably things like cairns, etc. So we're using Doogie's information to do that. Right, on the next slide, that shows you Ben Hynish. It shows you the lines that we have already surveyed, and it shows us the lines we've still got to survey. So if you can see my cursor, basically that area here, this sort of third quadrant, if you like, is the one we spent most time on. Now, you will notice that I've got different colours on this. The light grey ones up here is where we haven't been at all yet. This red dike north-south one and east-west one, these are stone dikes. This orange line here is the fence line, which was erected between East and West Hynish in 1913. So it's not actually a wire fence any long. All you can really see are the stumps of the posts along it. And John Holliday was kindly enough to go and take good references all the way along this so that we could actually plot it on the map. Now, when we were out doing the surveys, we were classifying the lines, and we were classifying them according to what they were made of. So if you look at my key here, the first one I've got mentioned is Dragon's Teeth. Now, if you're wondering what Dragon's Teeth is, that's the name that we came up with for isolated line of stones. And you can see there's some on the hillside over here, and there's some a bit in this the plateau bit as well, and some down here near the coast. Now, that's one type of line. It's no longer actually provides a wall, it is just a line of stones. You can easily step over it. It's not following a proper boundary now. We don't know whether that is because these were originally walls which have since been robbed, or whether originally it was just demarcating the land and it wasn't actually anything to do with keeping animals out of the crops, for instance. The next one on my list here is a fence, the black line. So we've only actually got small bits here on the east side because we haven't really surveyed the boundary. This here is around the boundary of our area. All this is much lower land here. Now the next one, the purple one, is stone and turf. Stone and turf walls are the most obvious ones when you actually go to Tiree. And as you can see, there's lots of them all over the place. By the way, that red item there is a fank. That is where Elaine was showing you an aerial photograph just a few minutes ago. So the stone dike was the red ones that go north, south, east, west. And this turf is another category. So I had 5 categories: Dragon's Teeth, fence, stone and turf, stone dike, and turf. Now we've got some turf one just coming down here, sort of south-west of the fank. We've got other bits of turf there. The turf ones are where we have seen no sign of stones whatsoever, but they're still forming a wall. So that's what we've done so far, and obviously we've still got all the rest to do, so we're not quite there yet. If I go to the next slide, that's me zoomed in to the area which Elaine was showing us just now. There's the fank there, and I've actually got the lines labelled with the sample numbers. So the first one that Elaine talked about was sample 1, which is this one here. It's a stone and turf wall. The maximum height is 1 metre, and this particular line here is actually in the first edition map. So sample 2 over here, the blue line is Dragon's Teeth. So that's the line of single line stones, if you like. So it's not actually a wall, it's just a line of isolated stones. The next sample that Diana went to do was sample 3, and it's up on the hillside, this one here. And again, it's Dragon's Teeth, which we think are probably prehistoric, because other archaeologists have been told John they think these are prehistoric. Next sample was sample 4, which was in the middle of this enclosure, the one that Elaine just showed you. The house is round about almost where it says 4. And again, that's a stone and turf one. This one here is 0.3 metres high. It's not nearly as tall as some of the other ones. Sample 5 is just this one above that. That is the stone and turf wall, and the maximum height of it is 1.2 metres. So you can see there's quite a difference between, I've got the cursor there, between 4 and 5. Hope you can see the cursor. So that is this area around here where the samples were taken from. Now, after I had added all the lines we had done in October to the database, I decided to have a look at the OS map and see if we could identify which of these lines were an OS first edition map. So this next slide shows you a copy of the first edition OS map, and on red I have drawn round all the boundaries of the fields on that. So basically this, when I go around the outside of this, that is our survey area. We're not looking at this bit to the east at all, just around this bit here. If you look closely, you can see that's where the fank is, just down there. Now, once I'd done that and had created that, I wanted to see how did people actually classify these lines when they walked around them. Obviously, we haven't done the whole of this area yet, only part of it. But if I go to the next slide, you can see which of these Ordnance Survey first edition lines we've actually classified. So the first one that probably sticks out is the red stone dike. And also the fank. So they are actually on that Ordnance Survey map. If I just go back to that, you can see there's the first edition map, and there's what we've seen of it. Now, we don't have any, you will notice, blue lines on this. There are no dragon's lines on this. So that definitely proves that they were not around when the first edition surveyors went round and did their work. Most of the lines we're seeing are actually stone and turf lines, like these ones, these ones. That's that enclosure which Elaine showed you. And this is the way that the OS line goes up. We've got a little bit done over here, but we've still got a lot to do in this area and that. And we also really need to walk right around the outside. Most of the outside is probably fence line. We've got two bits here, which people already have walked on their fence line. But we've now added in all the rest around this boundary. And from memory, I think all this bit around here is going to end up being a wire fence. We've got two bits of turf just there and there and there. And this is going to come up in the next slide as well. But you will notice there's this strange extra bit here. The line of the dike now runs very straight. Now, what I'm going to show you next is the Turnbull map, 18th century map. And you will see that the dikes come up again. Whether they were dikes from Turnbull saw them is another matter, but we've got the one north-south roughly and east-west. And what I've done in this one is I've tried to go back to the database and find out which of the lines that we can now see on the aerial photographs and also on the ground were in Turnbull. So Turnbull has got a red line going there, it's got a yellow line coming down here, and I've drawn in blue the ones that we have now, like up there, up to there, then across there. Now you will notice funny dog leg in the Turnbull one. And if I go back to the previous one, oops, back to this one, you will see this odd first edition OS map. And if I go back to this one, that's what we're seeing here. So now the actual dike runs straight over there, but for some reason Turnbull has got this bit here, where it's a dog leg. The other bit we've recognised from Turnbull, this line that goes round here. Now you will see it's actually displaced a bit from Turnbull's line. Turnbull's line goes round there, whereas the blue line that we see now, and that's all to do with trying to get an 18th century map and a 21st century aerial photograph, getting them aligned properly. And that's as really as we've done it as best we can. It has. But that is definitely, now that line there is also on the Ordnance Survey now. That is a tall wall there. That's one that you see when you go there. It stands out. And there's also this bit of the line which connects it up to what's now the dike. There's also other lines. When we looked at this originally, we didn't think that green line was actually going to be a boundary of any sort. We thought that was just wasn't a barrier in any sense at that time, but it looked like it actually was. So some of these ones here, those green lines might also, and this thing up here, which we haven't managed to recognise yet. So that's next on our list of trying to identify which of the Turnbull lines can we actually see now. So what we're wanting to do next, if I go back to that, what we want to do is actually add the houses, which Dougie has got the grid references for, and he's given me the spreadsheet for them, and add them to this, so that when we are looking at something like this, we can actually see the relationship of the houses to the enclosures. Up here, for instance, on the Dragon's Teeth lines, we sometimes see what looks like a building at the intersection of the lines. And I think also down, well, that's not moving this area, but there's a lot we can still do, even though we're not physically out in Tiree, we can still be working away and trying to make sense of all this, and hopefully end up with some sort of conclusions. And then we would obviously like to do a bit of excavation and try and prove some of these things. And Elaine has already mentioned that we would quite like to get involved in doing some test pitting, if the farmer allows. So I think that's the thing I want to say about that, and I shall stop the share